What's up, everybody? Welcome back to Fantasy Football 201. In today's video, we're going to look at lightly rostered players that you can start for Week 11. We're also going to talk guys that you can stash on your bench. We're going to look at the guys that are under 40% rostered in ESPN leagues and see who you want to play for this week and who you definitely want to roster among that group. Then we're going to answer some questions from the fans who have commented on this channel. So if you subscribe to my channel, you like the video, if you drop a comment, I reply to all my commenters and you get your questions answered on the show. So please take advantage of that with this small channel and subscribe to any cover you like for fantasy football content, as well as some other stuff that you can check out in the description below. So we just got to 600 subscribers yesterday. So thank you for everybody who supported the channel. Let's see if we can get that even higher by the end of the fantasy football season. Hopefully we can get to 700. We'll see. But might be a bit of a stretch for the season, but you never know. But anyway, we're going to go live on Sunday as well. So if you want to check that out, I'm going to be going live at 11:30 Eastern. And I'm going to be answering questions from anybody who comments. Your questions will be the priority. But I'm also going to talk start and sit decisions for all the games going on this weekend as well. So there'll be an agenda, but your questions will take priority. So check out the live channel, or excuse me, the live video that's going to be coming out tomorrow to get any last minute questions you have answered. So for this video, we're going to talk players that are under 40% roster that you want to stash and players that you want to start for this week. So we're going off of the ESPN stats, as I mentioned. And we've had a lot of hits with these players this season. Some of the guys that we've talked about include Cade Otton, Cedric Tillman, guys that are feature points of your lineup right now. So please take advantage of these because there's a lot of sneaky stats of players out there that your other league mates may not recognize. So you want to pounce on that now before they potentially go off. So we will start with the quarterback position. And with these quarterbacks, I could go under 20% with these guys because all the guys I'm going to talk about are under 20% rostered. But the one that I would be stashing, especially in two quarterback leagues, maybe not in one quarterback leagues, but for two quarterbacks leagues, you want to make sure that you stash this player because of his schedule for the fantasy football playoffs and the rest of the season. And that is Will Levis of the Tennessee Titans. And I talked about him a little bit in my last video that came out about trades that you can make for winning your league. But Will Levis has an incredible schedule to end the season. He has a tough matchup this week against Minnesota. So because of that, I would not be playing Will Levis this week. But I think you can get ahead of a good schedule matchup for him to end the season and try to get him now. And if you have space in two quarterback leagues, I'd be trying to make sure he's stashed. So he gets Minnesota this week, pretty tough. Then he gets Houston and Washington, which are both, teams have had success against those defenses. They're not poor, but they're not great necessarily. But then after that, the last game of the regular season in fantasy football, and then the three playoff games, he gets Jacksonville, Cincinnati, Indianapolis, and Jacksonville. So that's about as good as you can get for a closing schedule in fantasy football. Jacksonville in the championship game, he gets the Bengals mixed in there as well. And last week, he was 18 for 23, 2 touchdowns, and 41 yards rushing for a total of 19.1 fantasy points against the LA Chargers, which is a good defense. So has Will Levis figured something out? It's questionable, and obviously this is a deep league ad, so you're taking a risk with him. But if he puts together some good performances over the next couple weeks, then this playoff schedule is going to look incredible for him. So make sure that Will Levis is stashed on your bench. He's only 3.3% rostered in ESPN leagues. My start for this week, and this is another gross play, but I think that he will have a good game this week. It's Jameis Winston of the Cleveland Browns. So kind of a revenge game for Jameis. He's going to be coming back to New Orleans, his most recent team. And Jameis is a very emotional player. So guys like that who are in these big leverage games going up against their former teams, they tend to have a lot of success. And he especially did against Tampa Bay when he was with New Orleans. So the other thing that I like about Jameis Winston, though, is even though this is on paper a tough matchup, the number 9 defense against quarterbacks, they lost Marshawn Lattimore. So the numbers are a little bit skewed because we've seen guys like Bryce Young put up respectable performances against the Saints. We saw Bo Nix have his breakout game against the New Orleans Saints. So because of that, I think that Jameis Winston will have a good game. The last two performances that he had in week 8 and 9, he threw the ball 41 and 46 times. So he's going to have his opportunities to get the ball down the field. He may have some turnovers, which comes with the Jameis experience. But I do think that overall in this matchup, this is a good stream to play Jameis Winston this week. And he could be a respectable quarterback that I predict will fall between the QB 10 to QB 15 range for this week. And then an honorable mention I want to bring up in the same game as Derek Carr. And honestly, I'm at the point where I would kind of rather trust Jameis Winston than Derek Carr. Derek Carr has a lot of up and down games throughout his career, and he also gets a good matchup against Cleveland. I think this game will be a gold mine for a lot of fantasy points, but the thing that I don't like about Derek Carr is that he doesn't really have reliable options aside from Alvin Kamara and Taysom Hill. And if you want to include MVS in there, you can, but I feel better about what Jameis Winston has to work with than what Derek Carr has to work with. So because of that, I would play Jameis Winston over Derek Carr, but they're both decent streams, especially in 2 quarterback leagues for week 11. Next, we will move to the running back position, and my running back stash for this week, who's only 25% rostered. I talked about him in the last video as well. This is Gus Edwards of the Los Angeles Chargers. So Gus Edwards had missed some time. He went on IR for a stint, but in the matchup that he came back last week, he ran the ball 10 times for 55 yards. And this week he gets the Cincinnati Bengals, which is not a very good defense. So he's not by any means the lead back on this team. It's still J.K. Dobbins' backfield, but we've seen Dobbins have an injury history. He's also slowing down as well, whereas Gus Edwards looked more explosive in that game than J.K. Dobbins did. So could we be seeing a turning of the guard in a sense where, maybe they get Gus Edwards involved more as the season goes along? And this is another player who's got a pretty nice schedule, especially in the middle point of the season. He gets Tampa Bay in week 15 in that first round of the fantasy playoffs. So that is a very good potential matchup for him. So this is a potential home run play. You want to make sure that he's stashed by all means. Probably would not start him this week, though, because it's a situation where they're probably going to still use Dobbins more, and I don't like the volume as much to play Edwards this week if I don't have to. But a player that I talked about last week as well, who still is only 33.8% rostered, but figures to be the lead back on the Denver Broncos, is Audric Estime. So Audric Estime is a rookie out of Notre Dame. He profiles as a goal line back, kind of a bigger guy that's more of a first, second down running back. But what I love from his performance last week is that he easily outpaced the other running backs on this team in terms of carries. He got 14 carries. The next running back to get as the next best running back in terms of carries was Jaleel McLaughlin with 2, and then Javonte Williams, who was in a lot of lineups and had top 10 RB performances earlier this season, only had 1 carry. So Estime has shown the staff that he's given them trust that he can take over this backfield. And Atlanta is not an ideal matchup, so I think a lot of people are scared away by Estime. But if you have a guy out there that's only generally about a third rostered in league, 33.8%, but he's going to be the lead back on his team, I would be putting that guy in my lineup if I'm in a pinch. So Audric Estime, this Atlanta matchup is not ideal, but he gets some nice matchups coming up later on that I really like. He gets the Las Vegas Raiders in week 12, which is a huge bye week. So this is another reason to get ahead of Estime, is because week 12, we're going to have 6 teams on a bye, including Chase Brown, Breece Hall, guys like that. So Estime can be your replacement. So if he's out there, you want to make sure that you grab him. And I would be comfortable playing him this week because I do feel confident that he's going to get enough volume that he will be a safe play for you. And against Las Vegas next week, he's going to be an even better play in week 12. So for honorable mentions, I'm going to lump multiple players in terms of the name that I've been talking about so many times throughout the season are the handcuffs. And it amazes me going through the list of the handcuffs on ESPN in terms of availability, the guys that are still not rostered in the majority of leagues, but are potential lottery tickets. I mean, obviously, Gus Edwards and Estime could be breakouts, but if an injury were to happen to Breece Hall and Braelon Allen is the running back in New York the rest of the season, that's a home run ticket. I've already talked about how Breece Hall has the number one fantasy schedule for running backs the rest of the way, but Braelon Allen is only 20.1% rostered. So if he's out there, you want to make sure you stash him, even if you don't have Breece Hall, because if anything happens to Breece, you've got a guy that you know for a fact you can plug in every week and has upside to be an RB1 rest of season. So if you own Breece Hall, you want to make sure you have Braelon Allen. If you don't already, make that a priority. Cam Akers, the Minnesota backup running back, is only 16.8% rostered. Ray Davis of Buffalo, only 15.9% rostered. You got even the Trey Bensons for James Conner. If you have one of these running backs, and I feel like this is a broken record because I've been saying this for the last 2 months almost, but you want to make sure if you have these elite running backs that you have the handcuff. And the one that blows me away the most, Kenneth Gainwell of the Philadelphia Eagles, is only 1.8% rostered at ESPN. Did you guys see what Saquon did yesterday and what he's done all season? Could you imagine if he gets hurt and then you suddenly have Kenneth Gainwell in there that you could plug in, who it seems like every time he gets the ball, he gets 7 yards of carry? I mean, talk about a home run ticket there potentially. But anyway, my honorable mention stashes is make sure you have these handcuffs because this is the time of year when injuries happens, you want to make sure that you have these players because they can be huge breakouts for you. All right, now we'll go to wide receiver. So who is the stash under 40% roster that I want at the wide receiver position? And my answer is going to be Mike Williams. So Mike Williams has a very tempting matchup for this week. Number 32 ranked defense against Baltimore. And Mike Williams to me is a guy that I like in DFS plays. I think that he will get more involved as the season goes along, and I like his upside as a flex tier player. But for this particular week, I have a lot of red flags that I'm concerned about. For one, he got a touchdown last week, but it was his only target of the game, and he only played 9 snaps in that game. So you break down the percentages, and that's less than 10% of the plays Mike Williams was out there. And that's because, he's recently traded to Pittsburgh, still learning the offense. But I know that they're in a situation where they're going to be trailing this game to the Ravens potentially and having to throw the ball. But I think it's a huge risk to put Mike Williams out there for this week when you're coming off limited volume like that. We've seen a lot of these receivers that have been recently traded, like Amari Cooper, like Deontay Johnson, struggle to get acclimated right away and have an immediate breakout. So my fear is that a lot of people will be putting Mike Williams in, and it may backfire tremendously, and he could have a poor game. But that being said, he deserves to be more than 28.6% rostered. So if you have him, you want to make sure that you roster him because I've already talked about with Pickens, number one strength of schedule for wide receivers rest of the way, and that applies to Mike Williams as well. I don't think he will get the involvement this week that warrants putting him in your lineup, but I think as he gets more comfortable with the playbook, this is a huge sleeper and must be rostered. Who is my start among the wide receivers under 40% rostered? And I'm going to go with Demario Douglas for this week. So this is a player that I have liked throughout the season and for the most part has been pretty disappointed, but I am comfortable getting back on the Douglas horse for this week because he gets the Los Angeles Rams, which the Rams are ranked 22 against the pass, but they have been a pretty poor pass defense and have given up a lot of breakout performances on the season. You remember the Marvin Harrison Jr. game in week 2, the Jawan Jennings 3-touchdown game in week 3, the Jackson Smith and Jigba #1 wide receiver on the week performance 2 weeks ago. So this Rams defense has given up a lot of breakout games to the receivers, and Demario Douglas is the #1 receiver on the New England Patriots. They are starting to spread the offense a little more. Drake May is looking a little more comfortable. And I think that this is a game where Demario Douglas could be very successful, especially in PPR formats, to get a lot of receptions, hopefully get in the end zone for them as well. But I think that this is a great play among guys that is only about a 4th rostered in ESPN leagues, but is somebody that you can plug into your lineup and should be pretty successful this week. So I like Demario Douglas as a safe play that you could put in with upside. And then an honorable mention I want to mention among wide receivers for a stash, because you're not playing this player this week, but it brings up an important concept. Xavier Legette is only 41.7% rostered because he's dropped in a lot of places on his bye. And this is an important thing to keep an eye out for at this time of the season. We've got 12 teams on a bye in week, or sorry, not 12 teams. We've got 6 teams on a bye in week 12. Could you imagine if 12 teams were on a bye in fantasy? That would be horrible. But we've got a ton of teams on bye next week. So what you really want to do in these situations, because now the trade deadline is starting to come and pass, and you really win these moves at this point in the league through your waivers. So a lot of people are in situations where they may not be able to afford to roster certain guys, and Xavier Legette is kind of someone on the fringe. But as I've talked about, he has a great strength of schedule to close the season. He's the #1 wide receiver for the Carolina Panthers, and he has upside to continue to improve with Bryce Young. So if he was dropped on his bye and you have the ability to roster him, I would definitely do that. So, and there's going to be guys like this that come up over these next few weeks as well with the bye weeks coming up. So really pay attention to this. Xavier Legette is a good example of a guy like this because he's not quite 40%, but he's fallen down to 41%, and he definitely warrants somebody that you should add on your team for sure. Tight end. We will continue with the Carolina Panthers theme. This player is only 0.7% rostered, and I've talked about him quite a bit, but I do feel like a breakout is potentially coming for JaTavion Sanders. He is the potential #2 pass-catching option on this team because the Panthers have already traded away Deontay Johnson and Jonathan Mingo. Adam Thielen is old and injured. And then after Xavier Legette, it's either Jalen Coker or JaTavion Sanders. Sanders caught a touchdown this past game. Didn't get a lot of targets aside from that, but the week before, he had 87 receiving yards. So Sanders is starting to get more involved on this team, and I would not be surprised as the season progresses if they continue to see what they have in him and give him some more opportunities. And he's also coming off of this bye week. He has 2 incredible matchups at the tight end position. He gets Kansas City in week 12. That's another great bye week replacement right there. JaTavion Sanders, especially in deep leagues, to play against Kansas City, which, spoiler alert, I'll talk about their matchups for tight ends in just a sec. And then he gets Tampa Bay, which is another poor defense against tight ends. And then to make things even better, he gets Tampa Bay again in the fantasy championship. So potential sleeper right here. He's less than 1% rostered. Really take a look at JaTavion Sanders as a potential add before the week 12 waivers. And then my start for this week, who's only 9.2% rostered, is Dawson Knox of the Buffalo Bills. So Buffalo is dealing with some injuries, which helps Dawson Knox out. Dalton Kincaid is not going to be playing in week 11. And then Amari Cooper is trending towards not playing again. Talk about a really disappointing fantasy football season. But what this does is it sets Dawson Knox up in a great matchup against Kansas City, which, everything that I just talked about with the Los Angeles Rams and wide receiver breakouts, this is what Kansas City does to the tight end position. Mike Gesicki had a breakout game in week 2. Then you saw Cade Otton a couple weeks back have his breakout game against Kansas City. So this team hemorrhages points to the tight ends. They have great corners, but not necessarily defenders in the middle of the field. So Dawson Knox this week in a game where we're expecting a lot of points between Josh Allen and Patrick Mahomes in this game. I think Dawson Knox will get involved. I think that there's a great chance that he gets a touchdown this week. In leagues where you're looking for your replacement for your Kincaid or your Sam Laporta, who's also not playing, Dawson Knox is a great start, and he's only 9.2% rostered. And an honorable mention who I would also feel comfortable starting this player too, but I like Dawson Knox more. But a guy I would also feel comfortable starting for this week is Will Dissly. And I talked about Dissly in my last video. He's got the #1 strength of schedule the rest of the way for tight ends. He plays for the Los Angeles Chargers, if you're not familiar with him. And he gets Cincinnati this week. So Cincinnati, another poor defense against tight ends. And Will Dissly has been pretty involved in the offense the last few weeks. Granted, some of this was the absence of Quentin Johnson, but even with Johnson back the last 2 weeks, he has 5, 11, 7, 3, and 6 targets. So 6 targets this past game with Johnston in a game against Cincinnati where I'm expecting that they're going to be throwing the ball a lot more than they have in some of their games this season to keep up with that Bengals offense. He's got a lot of involvement, and his schedule the next couple weeks is incredible at the tight end position. He gets Cincinnati, then he gets Baltimore, Atlanta, and then Kansas City and Tampa Bay. So he gets a lot of the same schedule that Sanders gets that I just talked about. But Will Dissly is a great tight end option that's a pivot, and I think he's a good start for this week as well, but I would go Knox over Dissly personally. And then my flex play for this week, 2 guys that you want to, 1 guy you want to stash, 1 guy you want to start, as well as an honorable mention. My stash at the flex position is Marquez Valdez-Scantling. This is a player that for fantasy, I avoid him like the plague. And I'm talking about this in terms of my ability to start this player because, this game that we just saw him in New Orleans, he got 3 targets, 2 touchdowns, over 100 receiving yards, is a classic Marquez Valdez-Scantling trap game in which he, follows it up with no catches the next game. If him and Gabe Davis are the, the connoisseurs of this, whatever, I'm kind of blanking on whatever that word would be, but those guys are the textbook examples of what I'm talking about. Is that they're totally inconsistent. They have huge games from time to time, but then followed up with absolutely nothing. So he's only 13.1% rostered, and I've talked about this a little bit in my video earlier, but to me, he's more somebody I would roster to try to trade away. But the argument for Valdez-Scantling right now is that the Saints really do not have great receiving options. Olave is out for an extended time. They already lost Raheed Shaheed, and they're dealing with some other injuries too. So there's an argument to be made that MVS is going to continue to stay involved. I would personally not like those odds as somebody that I would want to, put him in my lineup eventually. But I think that this is all great information to trade him away. So for those leagues that have an extended trade deadline, roster him because, the worst things that happened is that if he doesn't do anything, you can just drop him this week. But if he has another blow-up game, then I think you have a great trade bait that can help you get a more consistent player later on. And then my start among the players at the flex position that is also under 40% rostered, Ricky Pearsall. He gets Seattle this week, the number 26 ranked defense. And there's a lot of mouths to feed on the San Francisco team, so it is a little bit concerning. But the thing that I do like is that Debo is dealing with injury. Kittle is dealing with injury, so you could see more involvement for Pearsall. He caught a touchdown this last game. He also got 6 targets. And he stayed pretty involved with his offense, even despite missing some action and starting the season on IR. To me, Ricky Pearsall in this matchup against Seattle will give you a solid play this week. I don't love him as a start necessarily at the wide receiver, but if you're looking for a flex piece to throw in, I think he will be very productive this week. And then another deep league sleeper, to keep an eye out who's under 1% rostered, Devaughn Vele of the Denver Broncos. So I think it's Vele or Vele. I'm not entirely sure how it's pronounced. But 4 for 39 and a touchdown this past week. And he's been getting consistently around like 3 to 5 targets a week, which is nothing special. But I do want to point it out because this Denver Broncos team, it's Courtland Sutton as the clear lead wide receiver, and then there's a void that needs to be filled. And, we thought maybe Troy Franklin could do it. Now it's looking more like Vele could be the guy to take advantage of this void. So I would stash him in those deep leagues and see how this develops. In Atlanta this week, they're going to need to throw the ball pretty often. Atlanta's got a good run defense, pass defense not so much. So I would stash Vele because if he has another great game, he could be a hot waiver wire addition in week 12. All right. So that's all that I've got for the under 40% start and stash players for this week. Now we will go to the fan mailbag questions for those fans that commented on the channel. And thank you for everybody that did. It really means a lot to me. I really enjoy helping you guys out with your league. That's why I have this channel, is to help you guys out and to give fantasy football advice. So any questions that you have, comment below. I reply to all my commenters, as you can see in the channel. So please take advantage of that. And any questions you got, feel free to run it by me, and you get your feedback directly answered. So we will start with questions from Dylan. So Dylan has had a lot of change to his roster. He's in a dynasty league I believe it's a keeper league, and kind of a tough season. But he's made a lot of good moves to get some more draft capital to set him up for success this season. So he traded some of his players like Sam Laporta, who I think were not. I think in general, tight ends that go that high, I'm not a big fan on. I was more of a fan of getting a guy like Brock Bowers later for less capital in this draft, and that's worked out pretty well. But sometimes, you make mistakes in draft, but it does give you the opportunity to pivot, and I think that he's done a good job of doing that. So shout out to Dylan for that. He's also asking questions about, in terms of dynasty value for his team. How do I rank the quarterbacks, running backs, and wide receivers, and then how would I rank the top 8 quarterbacks in dynasty? So I'll go through each position in terms of how I look at them in dynasty. So for me, for dynasty, I like younger players. I'll start with the quarterback. I like rushing value quarterbacks primarily. So my dynasty value is based on guys that are good runners of the football because of the potential for points. I also like younger quarterbacks. So, the guys, and I think that the beauty of this right now is that we're in a position or a league where a lot of our great quarterbacks are in their 20s still and have a lot of time ahead of them. So we're in a pretty healthy situation in terms of good quarterbacks. But how I rank them, number 1, Lamar Jackson. I think he has so much versatility in terms of running the ball, throwing the ball. And he, to me, is clearly number 1, especially with how they've adapted the offense to further develop his game. Number 1 quarterback for me in Dynasty. Then it's Jalen Hurts. I have them slightly apart in this because I think that, there's questions about Hurts' ability as a quarterback fundamentally versus Lamar Jackson. So there's a little more of I'm not a believer that Hurts is like potentially washed or anything, but I think there's a potential that he could fade out of the league earlier than Lamar Jackson for whatever reason. I'm not saying that I think that's going to happen. I'm just saying that I like Lamar to play longer in the NFL than Hurts. And then Josh Allen would be 3. He's a little older than these guys for 1, and then 2, his rushing style, I think, is more potential for, I guess the Cam Newton effect, where you just take such a beating that it kind of falls off over time. Then I would go Jaden Daniels. So I know Jaden Daniels has struggled in recent weeks, and Thursday night was not a good look for his long-term value, but I think he will figure it out. And the thing that's nice about that team is that with that rookie contract at the quarterback position, they can add players to build the team. Would that be a T. Higgins? Would it be, another receiver that's a pending free agent or somebody looking for a trade, etc. But I think Jaden Daniels is number 4 for me. Then I would go Burrow. And I say this because, Burrow has a little more of an injury history. Excellent quarterback, but he also doesn't give you the rushing value. I think that Jaden Daniels has the potential to be up there with the Lamar and the Hurts in terms of his overall fantasy production as he ages. Then I would go Kyler Murray at 6. Number 7 for me is Jordan Love. And then after that, I like to go with some of these younger guys that have more upside. So number 8 for me would be Bo Nix. And yes, that does sound pretty crazy, but I do think that Bo Nix is extremely talented, and I see his game aging really well as he progresses in the league. Number 9 for me is Purdy. I think that he's another excellent quarterback, and he's going to be around for a while. And then I would go CJ Stroud to round out my top 10. I know you asked for 8, but I'll give you 10. And in fact, I'll give you 12 because I had 2 honorable mentions too that I was thinking of. So I think Stroud is he's going through that sophomore slump, but I think that he's going to get back on track. I'm not really worried about that. Joe Mixon probably has like 1 or 2 more years, I would imagine, at this peak level that he's playing now. And then Stroud, meanwhile, has Tank Dell, Nico Collins. I think that this team is going to evolve to a more pass-heavy game as he matures in the league. And then the 2 honorable mentions for me are Patrick Mahomes and Caleb Williams. I am not of the belief that Caleb Williams is washed. I think that he will figure it out. And, hopefully they get a coach that can help develop his game. And because he has shown flashes of being a pretty good player this season. Running back. So in no particular order, these are guys that I like dynasty value. The top 5 to me are guys that I think have great potential to take over the lead running back role by a significant margin and turn into these guys like Saquon and Henry. Bijan Robinson, Kyren Williams. And I just say this because a lot of these guys are already the lead running back on their team by a wide margin. But I think that their game is just going to age really well. Chase Brown, I think that he's going to be excellent. Devaughn Achane and Breece Hall. So no particular order. Those are just 5 guys that I really like their long-term dynasty value. Really like Jonathan Taylor and James Cook too. And then 2 sleepers I want to mention because these rookies are people you want to pay attention to that I think can really break out. And I think based on these team situations could be good for these 2 players. Tyrone Tracy and Trey Benson. So Tracy has looked the best of the rookie running backs, in my opinion. Former wide receiver. So he's obviously got great PPR value as well as his game ages. And then Trey Benson has played pretty well too. He's just got James Conner in front of him right now. But Conner starting to get a little older. But the team infrastructure there is great. I think Jonathan Gannon is really doing a good job building that culture in Arizona. Kyler's going to be around for a while. Marvin Harrison, Trey McBride. Trey Benson, I could see him being a RB1 within the next 3 seasons. I don't know if it's going to happen in 1 year or later than that, but he's somebody that I really like his long-term dynasty value if you want to take a flyer. And same with Tracy. Wide receivers, Chase and Jefferson are kind of in a tier of their own right now, but then other guys, CeeDee Lamb, Amon-Ra St. Brown, Neighbors, Marvin Harrison, Nico Collins, Drake London, and then Puka Nacua. And then I think after that, it's a little bit of a drop off. I would go Garrett Wilson next because I think that Wilson is still really talented, but I have concerns with that Jets team. I have a feeling that they're going to draft somebody that's not ready this year, and then we're going to see the same pattern that we've seen seemingly for the last 10 years all over again with this team. So that definitely hurts Garrett Wilson's potential, but he's just so talented. He's got to be in the top 10 for Dynasty. But keep an eye out for Rashee Rice as well, because he was dominant to start the season. Unfortunate injury, but LCL injuries are not, I'm not really concerned about that affecting his play long term. So I think that he will be fine. But just keep an eye out for him because, if you're in a keeper league, you could keep 5 players like in the case of Dylan's league If Rashee Rice was dropped, I would definitely be picking him up because I think he's in strong consideration to be a keeper in 2025. So just pay attention to things like that on your waiver wire as well. Another question from Dylan. So who would you start between Russell Wilson, Darnold, Geno Smith, Aaron Rodgers, Kirk Cousins, Stafford, and Jameis Winston? So Russell Wilson would be the start for me of that week. And I would have probably included him in my start of the week for this week, but he's over 40% roster now. So he didn't qualify for this video anymore. But Russell Wilson of that group is the player I would start. And then do I value Mike Evans or Courtland Sutton higher long term? So this is a great question, but to me, I would go Courtland Sutton because he's younger. I think this Denver team is more built for sustained success over time. Evans, I think, he's as long as I think he's got one more good season in him, and then I see things kind of falling off. Courtland Sutton, on the other hand, though, I see him lasting a little bit longer than Mike Evans for the same reason. Excuse me. And then with Tampa, you got Chris Godwin there playing well, Cade Otton. In Denver, after Sutton, it's really pretty wide open. So I see Sutton taking advantage of that for a few more years. I value him a little more long-term than Mike Evans. So thanks for all the great questions, Dylan. A question from Reese. Scary Terry and Aaron Jones for Christian McCaffrey. So this is a good example of trying to trade for a player while he's down. In Christian McCaffrey, the owner may have been disappointed in the fact that he didn't get all his points that he wanted when he came back from his long injury stay. And I hope you took advantage of this trade because Terry McLaurin's value tanked a little bit this past week. But I think that this is an example of something you want to do because in general with these trades, I want to make sure that I'm getting the best player available because, this is not a great example of what I'm about to talk about because all these players are startable caliber players. But, for example, relative to Christian McCaffrey, Aaron Jones, you can find somebody out there who could potentially replicate that value. Somebody that gives you about 15 carries a game, close to 100 yards and a touchdown. Those players are some of these guys I've talked about, like Tyrone Tracy, like, maybe Audric Estime. We don't know. But Christian McCaffrey, on the other hand, where you're getting a running back who's not only rushing for that amount, but also getting 8 receptions on top of that and getting 3 touchdowns potentially. The ceiling of Christian McCaffrey is so high that you've got to take advantage of that. And you could find people on waivers to replace the guys that you lost. Like, you're losing McLaurin in this case, but there's plenty of wide receivers who you could bring up who could step into that role. Like, maybe if a Legette was dropped, that's somebody that you could who can make an argument is also going to be a number 1 wide receiver like McLaurin. And then you could put him into the lineup in his place. And then you've improved your ceiling so much at running back, though, that it's an incredible gain for you. So, yes, Reese, make that trade. Hopefully you already did before the Thursday night game. Let's see. And then, so this is a question talking about advice for how to build your team in the first year of playing football from Adam. Or from fantasy football, excuse me. So he has Kyler Murray and Drake May at quarterback, so he needs a bye week replacement for Kyler. Running backs are Jahmyr Gibbs, Chase Brown, Khalil Herbert. So handcuffing Chase Brown, that's smart. Zach Charbonnet and Jonathan Brooks. So pretty good running back room. Wide receivers are Drake London, Ladd McConkey, DeAndre Hopkins, Jalen Waddle, Demario Douglas, Rome Odunze, and Waddle. Tight end are Trey McBride and Gesicki. So he's got the Cardinals stack, needs to fill in the tight end position. So check to see if those 2 tight ends that are out there that I talked about earlier, Dawson Knox and Will Disley, are there. Gesicki, the downside with him is that T. Higgins is expected to play again. So Gesicki could be losing some of his targets. The Bengals use multiple tight ends already. So with Higgins back, Gesicki's floor drops quite a bit. So I would see if either Disley or Knox are out there and play them over Gesicki for this week. Then in terms of other advice, check if Russell Wilson is there. At quarterback, you can check to see if the other streamers that I talked about are there as well as somebody you could put in. Drake May is not bad, but he's not somebody that I love for this week. And then I also suggested a good thing to do is to add a third running back because there's a little bit of a drop off after Gibbs and Chase Brown. Jonathan Brooks would be the next guy, but he's on a bye, and then Charbonnet is a handcuff. So what I suggested to him earlier is to trade a Dunze or Waddle, and I believe what he ended up doing was trading. Well, he was gonna offer Waddle and a Dunze to try to get Dowdle with Charbonnet to the Kenneth Walker manager because Charbonnet is a good player, but he has more value right now to the Walker manager. So let me know, Adam, what you ended up doing and how that trade worked out. But hopefully you were able to get Dowdle because I think that would be a good player that you can add who I also like as a solid sleeper because he's going to get volume rest of the way for the Cowboys. Some other questions as well. So a trade from it's Frank Encio. He is getting offered Jefferson, Montgomery, and DJ Moore for CeeDee Lamb, Breece Hall, and Darnell Mooney. Excuse me. So another example of you're getting the best player in the deal in Justin Jefferson. As I've already mentioned, I love Breece Hall's schedule for the playoffs, but there's also a lot of arguments to be made that the Jets are just a bad football team. So maybe he doesn't take advantage of that schedule because they're just not in a situation to run the ball, which is what happened against Arizona last week. So, and then CeeDee Lamb has his value capped by the quarterback play. Justin Jefferson, to me, is the best player in this deal. You're getting solid consistency with Montgomery. Mooney is dealing with injuries now. And then DJ Moore has been a huge disappointment, but you can arguably say that he is going to have a boost now with the new offensive scheme. Maybe they'll get him more involved. So overall, I like this deal. It's a tough call because you are losing Breece with that schedule. But I think that you're upgrading by getting Justin Jefferson and the best player rest of season in fantasy. So I would make that trade. Christopher asked, why was Debo not in my top 20 on the wide receivers? And to me, he would fall like in right around 30 to me because he's a great player, but he's dealt with injuries so much. He has games where he's not involved. So I just have a lot of questions about Debo Samuel right now and what his effectiveness is going to be in terms of fantasy production that I would not be ranking him in my top 20. But he is a great player and definitely somebody that you want to be starting most of the time. Question from Emmanuel. Should I trade Achane and Jennings for Bucky and Amon-Ra St. Brown? So, and I think you can make the argument either way depending on the needs, but based on his situation, he has Derrick Henry and McCaffrey, so he's loaded at running back already. His best wide receiver is Keenan Allen, Jennings, and Waddle. So to me, that's the thing that makes the difference in this is because, you could make a good argument to keep Achane and then just have a three-headed monster at running back, but he doesn't really have the consistency right now at wide receiver to do that comfortably. One of the best things you could have in fantasy is just two elite wide receivers that you could just lock into that wide receiver 1 and 2. Most of the time, I like starting running backs in my flex because I know they're going to get a lot of volume. But when you have receivers that can lock into that volume, then that's the real moneymaker. And Amon-Ra St. Brown is one of those types of receivers. So I think if you can make that trade, I would definitely do that. You can find players to, one, fill in at the wide receiver, and two, give you another running back. And then you're getting Bucky Irving, who I think is, especially in a PPR league, is really going to give you a lot of value too. As I've talked about, the Bucks have the best running back schedule and number 4 rest of the way. Number 1 strength of schedule the rest of the season, but number 4 for the playoffs. So Bucky Irving will be great for you too. But definitely because you're improving that wide receiver position by so much, I would make this trade to get St. Brown. A question from Zoning Czar. So would you move Amar Chase for a combination of Pickens, Sutton, Jennings, and DeAndre Hopkins? Currently has Marvin Harrison, Kupp, Pearsall, and McMillan. So no, because Chase is easily the best of those receivers. And although I really like the schedule for some of these players like Pickens, Sutton, I like the involvement of Jennings and Hopkins too. Those are good players to start throughout the remainder of the season. But to me, nobody is going to give you the Jamar Chase. I don't even remember exactly what his numbers were in that Baltimore game, but it was like 11 receptions, 289 and 3. You're not getting that from any of those other receivers. So I would keep Chase. As I talked about, the Week 17 matchup against Patrick Surtain is rough, but the Bengals were in this situation a couple of years back where they had a rough matchup in the championship game, and then they just totally balled out. So I think you got to roll with Chase and just holding him in this situation, despite the good matchups for those other players in the playoffs. And let's see if there's any other questions. Believe that should be it for this week. So if you have any additional questions that you want answered, comment on this video, or better yet, if you want to join the live segment that's going to be happening at 11:30 on Sunday, please join into that. I'll be going live 11:30 all the way up to game time at 1 o'clock. So if you have any last minute questions, comment and join in on the chat. I'll be going through start sits for all the games, but your questions will take priority, as I already mentioned. So please check that out. And hope you guys have a great weekend and hope you have a great week 11. Hope to see you on the live chat soon. We'll talk to you guys next time. Bye.